What happens when the most expensive structural engineering firm in the Pacific Northwest tells Nadia Ose, the woman who just broke ground on a $74 million mixed-use development in downtown Tacoma, the woman who has not been wrong about a building in 17 years, that the tower she has staked her firm's reputation on cannot stand, that the load path running through the third-floor transfer beam is fundamentally compromised, that the building permit will be suspended by end of week, and that the only honest advice they can offer is to halt construction, demolish the partially completed frame, and begin again from the excavation. She fires them at 9 that morning. At 9:47, a man named Cal Brewster sets down his coffee thermos on the tailgate of his truck in the staging yard below the tower, tilts his head back to look at the third-floor framing, and says, to no one in particular, to his own assessment and no one else's, that the problem isn't the beam. It's the column connection 6 feet to the left of it. And whoever specified the weld schedule for that connection read the load table wrong. And the fix is 3 hours of work, maybe 4 if the access rigging is slow. He has not been asked his opinion. He is there to deliver acetylene tanks. His daughter is in the truck. She is 7 years old, and she has her father's capacity for looking at things with more attention than the situation seems to require. And she is looking at the tower the same way he is, and she has been looking at it since they pulled into the yard 5 minutes ago. And she has not said anything yet, which in her case means she is forming a conclusion she wants to be sure about before she reports it. Cal finishes his coffee. He picks up the first tank and starts toward the freight elevator. He has no idea that the woman walking out of the site, trailer toward him, clipboard in hand, hard hat slightly too large for her head, the expression of someone who has just ended a professional relationship and has not yet decided what comes next, is the owner of the building he just diagnosed. She has no idea what he just said. She is about to find out. Cal Brewster had been welding since he was 16, which was when his uncle had put a hood in his hands in a shipyard in Bremerton, and told him that the difference between a weld that holds and a weld that fails is not the heat or the speed or the rod. It is the attention you bring to the preparation. And the preparation is every single thing that happens before you strike the arc. Cal had taken that to mean the whole world, not just welding, which was either a useful life philosophy or a professional liability depending on the situation. And he had been arriving at situations his entire adult life where it turned out to be both at once. He was 39. His company, Brewster Structural Welding, 7 employees, established 11 years ago out of a rented bay in a shop on 6th Avenue, held fabrication and repair contracts with 4 general contractors in the South Sound region and 2 in King County, and had a safety record that the Washington Department of Labor and Industries had cited 3 times in print as a benchmark for the industry. On the wall of the office, in the rented bay, above the whiteboard where he tracked the week's job assignments, there was a framed copy of a letter from the foreman on the Tacoma Narrows Bridge Rehabilitation Project, a job that Cal had done as a subcontractor 6 years ago, that said, in the direct and unembellished language of someone who does not write letters unless the situation requires it, the welds on the North Span anchorage were the best I've seen in 30 years. That letter had been written before the job was finished. The foreman had not waited. On the passenger seat of the truck, a thermos, a job folder for today's acetylene delivery, and a set of structural drawings for a repair job in Puyallup that he was going to look at on Thursday. Tucked into the visor above the steering wheel, a photograph of his daughter Wren at 6 years old standing on the deck of the ferry from Bremerton to Seattle, arms out, the way kids stand when they want to feel the wind, her face pointed directly into it with the expression of someone receiving information. Wren was 7 now. She was in the passenger seat with a battered hardcover field guide to Pacific Northwest bridges, a book she had found at a library sale 3 months ago for 50 cents, and which she had read in its entirety twice. Which Cal knew because she had started asking him questions about the Tacoma Narrows collapse that he'd had to look up some of the answers to, which was not something that happened often. Around her wrist, on a length of braided steel cable too thick for a bracelet but worn as one anyway, was a single hex nut. His father's, from the last repair his father had ever made before the Parkinsons took his hands. A nut his father had pressed into Cal's palm at the end of that last workday, and said, "Don't lose this. It's from a bridge that's still standing." Cal had kept it for 9 years, and when Wren was 4 she had found it in his toolbox and asked what it was for. And he had told her, and she had said she wanted to wear it, and so he had threaded it on a length of cable, and that had been that. She wore it because she had told her teacher during show and tell, it was from a bridge that is still standing. And her dad says that's the most important sentence you can say about a thing you built. The ticking clock was 7 days out. He didn't know that yet. He didn't know that the suspended building permit, once issued, carried a 7-day window in which the owner could file a structural remediation plan with the city. A plan that required a licensed engineer's stamp and a remediation contractor already under contract. Or the permit would be formally revoked, and the project would enter a mandatory review period of no less than 90 days, which would cascade into a $4.2 million penalty clause in the development agreement with the city of Tacoma. He knew none of this. He knew the column connection was wrong, and the fix was 3 hours, and the beam everyone was blaming was not the problem. He finished the coffee and started moving tanks. Nadia Osei had been on this site since 6:30 that morning. She had been in the business of building things for 17 years. Commercial development, mixed use. One residential tower in Seattle that had won an award she kept in a drawer because she didn't believe in displaying things until they were standing long enough to have earned staying, and she had not been wrong about a building. In that time, she had been told she was wrong. She had been told by lenders, by city planners, by 2 business partners who are no longer her business partners, that the thing she was building was not viable. She had listened carefully and built it anyway, and been right. This was not arrogance. It was a 17-year track record. She had fired the engineering firm not because she believed they were wrong, but because they had delivered their conclusion before they had finished their analysis. And she had seen the hesitation in the lead engineer's voice when she had asked him to show her the load table calculation. And the hesitation had told her that the conclusion had preceded the evidence. And that was not engineering. That was a firm protecting itself. Her wound was not the engineering firm, not the permit suspension, not Sterling Marsh and his phone calls. Her wound was this. She had been building things alone for 17 years, and she was exceptionally good at it. And she had not once in that time had a person beside her who looked at what she was looking at and saw what she saw. She had partners who saw the return. She had engineers who saw the risk. She had no one who looked at a building under construction and felt what she felt, which was the specific and private satisfaction of something becoming exactly what it was designed to be. She did not know how to name what she was missing, because she had been missing it for long enough that she had stopped noticing it, the way you stop noticing a sound that has always been absent. She did not know yet what was actually wrong. She was walking toward the freight elevator with the intention of going to the 3rd floor and looking at the transfer beam herself when she heard, from the staging yard below, a man's voice say, "It's the column connection 6 feet left of the beam." The weld schedule was specced off the wrong load table. 3 hours to fix it, maybe 4. She stopped walking He was at the tailgate of a delivery truck, work jacket, hood down, a thermos in one hand and a clipboard in the other, reading off the acetylene delivery manifest with the attention of someone cross-checking the count against what he'd loaded that morning. He had not raised his voice. He had not been speaking to her. He had been speaking to himself, or to his assessment, which in his case was the same thing. She walked down the yard toward him. She said, What did you just say about the column connection? He looked up from the manifest. He looked at her hard hat, at the clipboard, at the site trailer behind her with the engineering firm's logo on the door, which he recognized because he had done repair work for their projects twice before. He said, Are you the owner? Yes, she said. What did you say about the column connection? He set the thermos on the tailgate. He looked at the third floor of the framing above them. He said, without pointing, without performance, third floor, north face. The column at grid intersection C7 has a moment connection that was welded to a schedule spec'd at 65% of the required shear capacity. You can see the weld profile from here if you know what you're looking at. The beam everyone's worried about is reading the load correctly. It's just reading it through a connection that can't transfer it. Fix the connection. The beam is fine. The building is fine. She looked at the third floor. She looked at him. How do you know what the specified weld schedule was? She said. He pulled the delivery manifest from the clipboard and turned it over. He took a pen from his breast pocket and wrote a number on the back. He held it toward her. That's the load value the connection was built to, he said. The structural drawings for this project are public record with the city. I pulled them last week when I heard there was a beam issue on this site, because I knew the GC and I wanted to understand what they were dealing with. The number on those drawings for that connection is different from what I can read in the weld from the yard. She looked at the number on the manifest. She looked at him. She said, before she had decided to say anything, Who are you? Cal Brewster, he said. I'm here with the acetylene. Wren came around the side of the truck at that point, because she had finished forming her conclusion. She was wearing her hard hat, her own, a child-sized one that Cal had painted yellow because the site supply didn't come in her size, and she had the bridge field guide under one arm and the hex nut bracelet visible at her wrist. She looked at the tower and then at Nadia with the focused assessment of a person who has been riding to job sites since she could sit up and has learned to read adults who are standing near buildings the way other children read faces. She said, the column at C7 has the wrong weld. Dad saw it when we pulled in. Nadia looked at her. I saw it when we pulled in too, Wren said, but I didn't know what it was called yet. Nadia looked at the column. She looked at Cal. She studies the sites, he said, in the way he said things about Wren, without explanation, without apology, as a fact that was simply true and did not require defending. Wren opened the bridge guide and turned to a page she had marked with a folded receipt. She held it toward Nadia, a diagram of a moment connection in a truss bridge. The weld profile annotated in the margins in her father's handwriting from when he'd explained it to her 2 weeks ago. Nadia looked at the diagram. She looked at the child. She was in the middle of a crisis that had cost her a $200,000 engineering engagement and was threatening a $74 million project. And a 7-year-old girl with a bridge guide was showing her a diagram annotated by a delivery driver. She did not know what to do with that, so she looked at it carefully, because looking carefully at things was the one response she trusted in all circumstances. She said, "Your father annotated this for you." "He annotates everything," Wren said. and then I ask questions until I understand it. Something in Nadia's face shifted, not dramatically, not visibly to anyone not watching for it. The tight focus she had maintained since 6:30 that morning, the focus of someone holding a crisis at a manageable distance, went briefly somewhere else. She looked at Cal. He was already back at the tailgate, loading the hand truck for the second tank. The project's development partner arrived at the site at 11:15. His name was Sterling Marsh, and he arrived the way he arrived everywhere, already in the middle of a sentence, a phone pressed between his ear and his shoulder, the other hand occupied with a coffee from the place 3 blocks away that he liked, because they knew his name and his order, and treated him with the specific familiarity he had decided, long ago, constituted respect. He ended the call when he saw Nadia at the foot of the elevator with a man he did not recognize, and he came across the yard running the calculation that he always ran in any new situation. Who is this? What do they want? And how does it affect what I need? He arrived in the conversation and did not wait to be introduced. Nadia, he said. I heard about the engineering firm. We need to talk about the remediation timeline. The lender is asking questions and I want to get ahead of the narrative before it. Sterling, she said. The permit suspension is going to hit the trades press by Friday if we don't. Sterling, he stopped. She said, this is Cal Brewster. He has identified the structural issue and can execute the remediation. I'd like you to let me finish this conversation. Marsh looked at Cal. He looked at the delivery truck. He looked at the jacket, the hood looped over the collar, the steel-toed boots with the weld burns on the toes that no amount of cleaning would fully remove. He smiled, which he did the way someone smiles when they have already discarded the thing in front of them and are being polite about it. And what firm are you with? He said. Structurally speaking. Cal looked at him. He said, the weld schedule deviation on grid C7 is documented in the city's permit file as of last Thursday, when the GC's site superfiled an observation report. The report is a matter of public record. The observation report was not shared with the engineering firm you retained. It was filed separately, which means the firm's analysis was conducted without the most current site documentation. He folded the delivery manifest and put it back on the clipboard. The lender's rep will find that discrepancy when she reviews the permit file, which she will do before the 7-day remediation window closes. If the remediation plan is filed with a stamp and a contractor already under contract, the lender's concern resolves. If it isn't, the mandatory review period begins and the penalty clause in the development agreement with the city activates. Marsh had stopped smiling. The penalty clause is $4.2 million, Cal said. You have 7 days. He picked up the hand truck and moved the second tank toward the elevator. Marsh looked at Nadia. His coffee was in his hand, and he had not put it down, and it was now at an angle that would have been concerning if he had been aware of it, which he was not, because all of his attention had gone to the piece of information about the observation report and the permit file, and the part of his face that usually led with confidence had gone somewhere else, and in its place was the particular expression of a man who has realized that a room he thought he controlled has a door he didn't know about. He said, how does a delivery driver know about the observation report? Nadia said, he reads the public record. She picked up her clipboard and walked to the elevator. She did not look back. Marsh stood in the yard, his coffee tilted a further 2 degrees. He looked at the 3rd floor of the framing, at the column at grid C7 that he could not identify from the yard and would not have known what to look for if he could. And he had the slow, total experience of pressure, leaving a situation. Not dramatically, not with an exit, but the way certainty leaves when the ground it was standing on turns out to be thinner than it appeared. He put his phone back to his ear. He called someone. His voice, when it came, was quieter than it had been. The remediation plan was filed at 3:47 that afternoon, stamped by a licensed structural engineer who had reviewed Cal's analysis and agreed with it in full, and who had added, in a note at the bottom of the technical summary that was not required by the filing, but that he included anyway, that the original weld schedule deviation had been introduced at the submittal stage, not the fabrication stage, and that the deviation was consistent with a pattern of specification errors across 3 other projects permitted by the same plan review coordinator in the previous 18 months. That note, 4 sentences, added because the engineer believed the record should be complete, was forwarded to the city's permit office and from there to the Washington State Department of Commerce, which had an open inquiry into the pattern that had been running since February. Marsh's development partner license was suspended 31 days later, pending a formal review. The suspension was not the end of the story for him, but it was the end of the story for this one. Nadia was in the site trailer when the confirmation of filing came through. Cal was still on site. The access rigging for C7 had been slow, as he had predicted it might be. And he had worked through lunch, which was a thing he did on jobs where stopping felt worse than the hunger. The fix had taken 4 hours and 20 minutes. The column connection at grid C7 was now correct. The building was standing the way it was always supposed to stand. She came out of the trailer and looked at the 3rd floor. She looked at Cal coming down in the elevator with the rigging on his shoulder and his hood up, and the particular stillness of someone who has done the thing they came to do. What she saw on his face was not satisfaction. It was something more ordinary than that. The expression of a person in the last 30 seconds of a job that needed doing. Already making the list of what comes next. Already somewhere else in his thinking and perfectly comfortable there. Not triumphant. Not waiting to be noticed. The job was what it was. He had done it. The building was standing. These were facts in sequence, and none of them required an audience. She had been looking at buildings for 17 years. She had looked at engineers and contractors and project managers and development partners and foremen, and she had watched them complete things. None of them looked like that when they finished. They looked relieved or proud or ready to be paid. They looked at her, waiting. Cal was looking at the clipboard. She said, 4 hours and 20 minutes. He said, the rigging was slow. She looked at him. He looked at the 3rd floor once more. A final check. The way you check a door you've already locked, not because you doubt it, but because the habit of checking is part of what makes the lock worth trusting. And then he moved toward the truck. 8 months later, the tower was complete. It stood at 17 stories on a corner of downtown Tacoma that had been a surface parking lot for 11 years, which was long enough that people had stopped noticing the gap the way you stop noticing a missing tooth on someone you see every day. The tower filled the gap. It was not the tallest building on that block. It was the most carefully built, and the people who knew what to look for could see that in the way the frame met the ground. Wren's hex nut bracelet had acquired a second nut, a larger one, from the C7 connection, which Nadia had asked Cal to set aside when the original weld was cut away, and which Cal had brought home that evening and Wren had found on the kitchen table and had held up and looked at in the particular way she looked at things that were adding to the collection, and had asked, "Is this from a building that's still standing?" Cal had said, "It is now." She had threaded it on the cable beside the first one. The 2 nuts sat together at her wrist, which she wore every day to school and to the library, and to job sites, and to the opening of the tower, which she attended in her hard hat, yellow, newly repainted, because she had grown into a slightly larger size, standing beside Nadia at the base of the building, while the city's development director said the things that city development directors say at ribbon cuttings, which Wren was patient about because she understood that ceremonies served a function even when the function was not the most interesting part. Nadia had started a second project. She had not asked Cal if he was interested. She had sent him the structural drawings for the transfer connection on the second-floor framing and asked him to call her when he had looked at them. He had called her that evening. He had said, "The drawings are right this time." She had said, "I know. I checked." He had said, "Then what do you need me for?" She had been quiet for a moment, and then she had said, "I wanted to know what you thought." He had told her. They were still on the phone at 11 that night, which neither of them mentioned to anyone. On the last Saturday of the month, Nadia came to the rented bay on 6th Avenue with 2 coffees from a place she had found 3 blocks away. Ren was there, at the corner work table that Cal had built low enough for her to work at comfortably, annotating a new page in the bridge guide, a suspension bridge this time, something she had decided to understand fully before she moved to the next type. She had borrowed a second pen from the mug on Cal's desk and was writing in 2 colors, her questions in blue, the answers he'd given her in red. Nadia set the coffees on the workbench and looked at the bridge diagram over Ren's shoulder. Ren did not look up. She said, "He explains it until it makes sense. He doesn't stop until it makes sense." Nadia looked at the diagram, at the red annotations running alongside the blue, at the care in them, the patience, the specific quality of someone who has answered the same question 14 different ways until the right one arrived. She said, "I can see that." From the other side of the bay, the sound of Cal returning a grinder to its hook on the pegboard, each tool in its place, each outline traced in marker on the pegboard backing, so that missing tools announced themselves. The sound of order made by hand. Ren held out the second pen, the one with the blue ink, without looking up. Nadia took it. She looked at the diagram. She did not know what question to write. She held the pen against the page for a moment, over a section of the drawing that she had been looking at and could not name. Ren pointed at it. "That's the main cable anchorage," she said. "Dad says that's where all the tension resolves." Nadia looked at where she was pointing. She wrote it down. The strongest connections are never the ones visible from outside. They are made in the preparation, before anyone is watching. They are made in the careful reading of a load that everyone else has already decided belongs somewhere else, in the attention brought to the work when the work doesn't know it's being watched, in the single hex nut from a bridge that is still standing because somebody prepared it right the first time. If this story held you, if you know someone who has looked at an impossible thing and quietly found the fix, share it with them today and let them know you see it. Subscribe so you never miss the next one. And leave us this in the comments. Have you ever watched someone do something so precisely and so without ceremony that you only understood what you had witnessed after they were gone? And if so, what did you wish you'd said while you still had the chance? We read every one.